Hello everyone, this is Don 151 and Mekkah.
Hi.
And welcome to Chapter 24, my Fire Emblem 7 Hector Hard Mode 0% Gross playthrough. FE7 doesn't have a true route split like FE6 or FE8 do, but it does have a couple of chapters in which there are two variations that you can go to depending on some esoteric criteria that you have to fulfill. And Chapter 24 is the first of those. There's two versions of this map that are completely different and feature a different boss, one of the Reed brothers, either Linus or Lloyd. If the sum of your Lord's levels is 50 or greater, then you go to Linus's version, which is larger, has more enemies, and the boss that you have to kill is farther away. So in an LTC, it's preferable to go to Lloyd's version, which is the one that we're on right now, where the boss starts much closer, and it generally takes fewer turns. In fact, one turn in this chapter in a gross playthrough is pretty trivial. Also, it's just much easier to not train Lyn or Eliwood, or even Hector, especially in 0% growths, where I doubt it's reasonably possible to even go to Linus' version of forfeiting offense if you try to adhere to LTC criteria.
So the main objective of this map is kill boss, which in practice just means walking Hawkeye up to him and killing him, which can be done as early as turn 1 or 2. Of course, that means it will be harder to recruit Wallace, who is much harder to get in a fast playthrough. Wallace starts in the upper right corner of the map. He's an NPC you can recruit with some people from Kaelin, so Lyn, Kent, Zane, Florina, or Will. You might think the fastest option to get to him is Florina, but getting her to promotion is quite a pain because of her stats being so bad in Hector mode, if you haven't trained her in Lyn mode at all. So instead we chose to train Kent and get him to level 10 for the sake of this chapter. And pretty much all of our other units are in the service of Kent and making sure that he is safe as he makes his way to Wallace, including Ninian, who's going to be dancing for him to maximize his movement. Now, fortunately, the way to Wallace that we're taking also leads through an area with all the side objectives that we want to get. There is a armory we want to visit that sells Reaver weapons. We are specifically interested in 2 Lance Reavers and 2 Sword Reavers, the latter of which are particularly good in this chapter, as they increase our performance against the boss Lloyd substantially. And then the other objective we want to get is the Bishop that Isadora is killing with a Silver Sword. This guy has a Purge Tome, and if you let him attack you with that Purge Tome, he will drop a Shine Tome instead, so killing him on turn 1 is important. Isadora does a bit of a convoy drop, where she sends her Silver Sword to the convoy after getting the Purge. You might think this is for survivability reasons, but it actually is just to preserve the Silver Sword for future chapters, because if you just physic her with Priscilla after this move, she's just fine against the enemies that will attack her.
This armory visit is one of the more important ones in this entire run because it's our only opportunity that we get to buy Reaver weapons in bulk, and we already introduced you to them back in Chapter 22 where they were in the hands of most of the enemies, but in the player's hands they're also pretty useful. Reaver weapons are notable for being great defensive tools because the player has more opportunities to leverage double weapon triangle advantage where you can get plus 30 avoid and plus 2 defense, especially for units like Isadora and Marcus where they can use all 3 Reaver weapons. It's really helpful for them. They're like steel weapons, except that they're a bit lighter, so they're just good weapons overall. The only caveat being that they're much more expensive. And one other great property of them that people often don't take into account is that, like steel lances and steel axes, Reaver weapons give double weapon EXP. So that means that in the upcoming portion of the game, when we're trying to grind up weapon ranks for our units, because there's not a whole lot else to grind up during this upcoming segment, as we try to S-rank some units in their primary weapon types, then we're going to be using the Reaver weapons a lot to kind of just hasten that process and reduce the amount of combat that we have to do.
Isadora just cannot catch a break in this chapter and got put to low HP again, this time by a really strong enemy hero. That's okay though, because Physic is still available from Priscilla, and this time Priscilla is actually positioned on a tile that we use the Torch Staff on, and that means that we can activate the Canto glitch on top of it and move her away, even though using a staff is normally not an action you can combine with Canto. Now the enemy hero, we actually don't even need to kill him, and we don't want to, because he's just that strong. He's got way higher stats than what we're used to dealing with. Instead, what we are doing is running past him and making a defensive formation with our mounting units to make sure that he cannot get to fragile units like Ninian. Normally we make walls to deal with enemies that are coming from ahead of us and make our wall in front of our fragile units, but you can see that this time we're doing the reverse and we're putting a wall behind us. Now on the left side, Hawkeye positioned himself on a fort, and you can see the 2 tiles above him. There's an enemy Myrmidon just chilling there, minding his own business. That positioning of both of him and of Hawkeye is actually very precise, because it is in range of Lloyd, and Lloyd has a 1-2 range light brand. But because of the positioning of the Myrmidon, he is forced to engage Hawkeye at 1 range. This is great because we convoy dumped a Sword Reaver from the armory and traded it to Hawkeye over the course of the first 2 turns, and because of that we get to take off half of Lloyd's health in 1 attack. Now from there, it's only going to be one more attack to kill Lloyd. And one of the most unreliable parts of this chapter is actually Hawkeye not critting Lloyd on this turn to end the chapter before we get the chance to recruit Wallace.
I want to shift our attention to Wallace, who's been wandering around the fog like someone who's blind, which apparently is one of Wallace's defining character traits. It's kind of like a Fate's Awakening sort of character trait, where it's like the only defining thing about him, that he has a bad sense of direction, and this is a great place for him to have a bad sense of direction in. It turns out, though, on the first two NPC phases, that Wallace's actions are pretty predictable. If he gets hit by the long ballista that assaults him twice, then he'll always be a low enough HP to force him to use a healing item on this NPC phase, and he'll always run towards that corner next to the village, which is just in range of where Kent needs to be. If he happens to dodge a ballista hit, that's fine. He'll actually start coming closer to us to get closer to that Myrmidon nearby, so that's not a problem. The only times where I've had an issue with trying to recruit Wallace is if you take a little bit longer than 3 turns, because that's when variability starts to spiral out of control. And one interesting thing about NPCs in Fog of War is that NPCs and enemies are both clairvoyant. They can see all their targets even if they're obscured by the fog. But the exception is that if they go into healing AI, then they somehow forget that they can see everything. And it's possible for Wallace to, in the process of retreating, bonk into an enemy and fail to use an elixir, and that will cause him to die. So I've seen that happen a few times, and it's definitely very hilarious and frustrating.
So Hector's job on the left side is to make sure that Canas always has something to heal, and he failed miserably because FE7 enemies are so bad that they can't even hit a base level Hector at this point in the game. So what we're doing is we send him into the arena. This is the most likely way for him to get hurt. The cash that we get and the XP are completely inconsequential. So if it was a less favorable fight than this one, we would just throw it, just to make sure Canas can improve his E-rank stabs. From there, we have a couple of things left to do on the map. We have 2 vendors that we can visit, but only one of them is going to end up being visited by Fiora. One of them sells restore stabs, and for most casual players this is good, but we just kind of have one, and that's all we need for late game. So we pass up on it. Instead we just buy a Thunder in the other one, and that's it. Then in the upper right corner there's a village with the Silent Staff. It's pretty useless, and unfortunately Wallace doesn't have the movement to get to it, so we have to pass up on it, but at least we got the Earth Seal, which is an item that we can use to promote just about any unit. From there, all that's left to do is kill Lloyd with the Sword Reaver, and that is going to be chapter 24, completed in 3 turns. We will see you next time.
See ya.